This is Noah Lyles. You might have witnessed his incredible performance in the Olympics recently, sprinting in the men's final 100-meter race and winning gold with an absolutely insane photo finish. It was the first time the United States had won gold in this event since Justin Gatlin won it 20 years ago in Athens, which makes his performance so impressive. But another thing about Noah that separates him from his other running mates in Paris is that because of a chronic condition, his lungs literally squeeze and prevent him from getting enough oxygen when he exercises, which means that when he won the gold medal, he did it with this condition that literally takes his breath away, which makes his win even more insane. Right after winning his gold medal, Noah Lyles went to Twitter to broadcast his thoughts about being victorious at the Olympics, despite harboring a few medical setbacks. But you probably know someone who has asthma, or maybe you even have it yourself. And for the most part, people with asthma seem to be doing okay with its symptoms. So why was Noah so keen on mentioning it immediately after his race?
Why don't you show me how your inhaler works?
Jerk.
Inside of your left and right lungs, you have these branching airway formations that then become smaller and smaller, leading to the smallest pathways known as bronchioles, and then eventually to these grape-like clusters called alveoli, which is where oxygen is absorbed into the body and carbon dioxide is expelled. Asthma is a chronic pulmonary condition characterized by the impairment of these bronchial branches, which makes up the airways essential for proper respiration or breathing. So when an individual with asthma encounters a trigger like dust, pollen, smoke, or physical exertion, the bronchial pathways become constricted, which then impedes a person's ability to breathe effectively. To get an idea of how much of an effect asthma has on your breathing, let's take a look at what happens to your lungs. When a trigger occurs, one of the major things that happens is something called a bronchial wall edema, which is when an excessive amount of inflammation occurs on the walls of the bronchi and bronchioles, which then narrows the pathway where CO2 can leave and oxygen can enter. This inflammation then causes dyspnea, or shortness of breath for the poor patient, and if you've ever suffered through an asthma attack before, you know exactly how this feels. The result is that feeling of suffocation, where no matter how hard you try to breathe, it still feels like you don't get enough air. This excessive inflammation of the walls also triggers goblet cells to make extra mucus into these pathways, which, under normal circumstances, is great for trapping any unwanted particles and bacteria, but for someone with asthma, causes even more impairment with the airways since there is nowhere for the mucus to go, except sit in the way of where gas exchange happens. Finally, these pathways in the lungs are lined with smooth muscle, which, when triggered by inflammation, start to contract, which causes bronchoconstriction of the pathways, completing the awful dyspnea trifecta of feeling like you're suffocating no matter how hard you try to breathe. Okay, so we now know that a trigger can set off these events that cause your airways to become narrower, but what happens in between the introduction of an asthmatic trigger that causes the physical symptoms to occur in the first place?
Yeah, Mr. White. Yes, science.
Your body contains these funky-looking cells known as dendritic cells, and when a trigger enters your body, your dendritic cells express a portion of this trigger to an immune white blood cell lymphocyte called Th2. Once the Th2 cells participate in this exchange, it releases these little bits of protein known as cytokines, and depending on what kind of cytokines are released, certain pathways can open up that lead to different effects on the body. Now, there are a wide variety of these cytokines, and the charts look like this. So we'll focus on the interleukin 4 and interleukin 5, which have the most relevance in this scenario. Interleukin 4 and interleukin 5, when released by these Th2 cells, stimulate the activation of other cells in your body, like eosinophils and plasma cells. Interleukin 5 activates eosinophils, which are a type of white blood cell and interact directly with the smooth muscle portion of your lungs, which causes that airway narrowing process of bronchoconstriction. But the plasma cells go on a little journey to say hello to its mast cell friends, and by sending them little antibody presents, they release little immune system chemicals called histamine, which causes the excessive edema and mucus in your airways. Now, because asthma is a chronic issue, Noah probably dealt with this issue for the majority of his life, and after some research into his experiences with this condition, it turns out that he had a particularly bad experience with the symptoms that arise from having such a debilitating issue. At age 3, Noah first exhibited the symptoms of asthma, having coughing fits and difficulty with eating food. Initially, doctors thought that it was some sort of reactive disease with his airways, and it wasn't until he was 5 years old that an actual asthma diagnosis was properly made. And while a proper cure for asthma doesn't really exist, medication and management are more than enough to mitigate the more severe symptoms. So, that's how he did it. A mere respiratory disease wasn't enough to stop him from becoming the fastest man on the planet. So I guess we'll see him in another 4 years, criticizing the NBA once again.
World champion of what? The United States?